These wars rewrote borders and reshaped nations. But history didn't honor them. It chose to forget them. Wars that shaped empires, erased from classroom memory, lives sacrificed but never spoken about, because some stories didn't fit the narrative. These wars changed borders, identities, destinies. So why were they buried? Who decides what we remember and what gets erased? These are the wars the world chose to ignore. If you haven't seen part 1, it's linked in the profile and in the description. Watch that first, then come back, because once you see what was hidden, history will never feel the same again. Let's bring them back to memory. This isn't just about conflicts. It's about memory, about silence, about the parts of history that were edited out. Lives were lost, nations were changed. But remembering them wasn't convenient, so the stories that challenged power disappeared. Who gets to decide what history remembers and what gets erased without anyone noticing? These wars didn't fade away. They were pushed into silence, and now we bring them back into the story. If you want these forgotten histories brought to light, hit like and subscribe to support the series. Drop a comment with the war you want a full deep dive on. Your suggestion might be the next episode, because when we reclaim memory, we reclaim the truth. War number 30, the Algerian War of Independence, a revolution that still scars a nation. Algeria lived under French rule, its people treated as outsiders in their own land. In 1954, the resistance rose, the FLN, demanding independence. The war moved into cities, ambushes, reprisals, street-to-street fear. More than 1.5 million Algerians were caught in the struggle. Historians estimate 300,000 to 1 million deaths. Soldiers and civilians, torture, disappearances, mass detention. The violence left permanent scars. The conflict reached the streets. The world finally took notice. Pressure grew. Even inside France, support for the war collapsed. And in 1962, Algeria voted for freedom. Over 1 million settlers fled the country overnight. Thousands returned home carrying trauma they never spoke about. And the memories remained buried. This wasn't just a war. It was a wound. One history tried to lock away. Independence was won. But the pain never truly left. This is war number 30 in this video. The first 15 wars are in part 1, linked in the profile and description. And now, we continue. War number 29, the First Indochina War, where empire tried to return, and history changed direction. After World War II, France came back to reclaim its colony in Indochina, but the Viet Minh refused to bow, fighting for independence. The war moved into mountains, rivers, villages, everywhere. More than 500,000 French and colonial troops were sent into the war, and millions of civilians were trapped in the crossfire. By the end, over 400,000 people died, soldiers and civilians combined. The decisive moment came at Dien Bien Phu. The Viet Minh hauled artillery through impossible terrain and rained fire on a fortress that believed it couldn't be touched. After 56 brutal days, the fortress fell. The defeat shocked Europe and ended France's colonial dream. Vietnam was split, north and south, a temporary line that wouldn't stay quiet. This war didn't end the story. It lit the fuse that became the Vietnam War, a forgotten beginning to one of the world's most famous wars, and its echoes still shape generations. This is war number 29 in this video. The first 15 wars are in part 1, linked in the profile and description, and the story continues. War number 28, the Polish-Soviet War, an underdog fight that reshaped a continent. Poland had just returned to the map, and the young nation was still fragile. But the Soviet Red Army marched toward Europe, hoping to spread revolution. Poland stood alone, outnumbered, outgunned, but not willing to surrender. Over 1 million troops were drawn into the fighting. Entire cities became battlefields, families caught in the crossfire. By the end, around 100,000 people died, soldiers and civilians combined. In 1920, the Red Army reached the gates of Warsaw. Polish forces launched a daring surprise maneuver and shattered the Soviet lines in a single decisive strike. The invasion collapsed, and Europe breathed for a moment. A fragile border was drawn, but the tension never truly ended. And 2 decades later, those borders would ignite again. This wasn't just a victory. It was a temporary pause in a storm still coming. A forgotten war, but one that changed the course of history, and its echoes still linger across Eastern Europe. This is war number 28 in this video. The first 15 wars are in part 1, linked in the profile and description, and the journey continues. War number 27, the Crimean War, where the modern age of warfare arrived early. It began as a struggle for power between empires on the edge of collapse. Soon, Britain and France joined the fight, turning it into an international war. On the front lines, trenches, mud, and cold became deadlier than bullets. More than 2.5 million soldiers were drawn into the conflict. But the real killer wasn't combat. Over 400,000 lives were lost, most to disease, infection, and starvation. The war became a grinding siege, months of bombardment with little gain, and one tragic mistake sent cavalry charging straight into death. For the first time, the public watched war unfold through mass media. Telegraphs, railroads, logistics. War was becoming industrial, and medicine changed forever, because the suffering could no longer be hidden. When the war finally ended, little land changed, but the world had. This wasn't just another 19th century conflict. It was the dress rehearsal for the wars to come. A forgotten war, but the first glimpse of the 20th century battlefield. And its lessons were learned far too late. This is war number 27 in this video. The first 15 wars are in part 1, linked in the profile and description. And the story moves forward. War number 26, the Italian-Turkish War. The conflict that brought warfare into the sky. Italy invaded Ottoman-controlled Libya, chasing territory, power, and prestige. The Ottomans resisted, but the desert battlefield was brutal and unforgiving. And then, history changed. Airplanes entered war for the first time. Recon missions, bombing runs, the first aerial strikes ever recorded. Across the campaign, over 20,000 people were killed or wounded. Cities emptied. Civilians paid the price for technology's new frontier. Italy tightened its grip, combining sea, ground, and air power. The Ottomans struggled to hold ground, stretched thin across empire. The war ended with Libya under Italian control. But the true impact wasn't territory. It was the realization that war would now be fought from the air. A preview of the devastation the 20th century was about to unleash. This wasn't just a colonial war. It was the moment the sky became a battlefield, a forgotten conflict, but the beginning of modern air war, and its shadow still follows every war that came after. This is war number 26 in this video. The first 15 wars are in part 1, linked in the profile and description, and the story keeps unfolding. War number 25, the Malayan Emergency, a jungle conflict that rewired the way wars are fought. Deep in the jungle, communist guerrillas launched an insurgency against colonial rule. The British responded with soldiers, aircraft, and a new kind of warfare. Civilians were moved, monitored, controlled to cut the rebels off from support. Over 500,000 civilians were relocated into fortified settlements. Across the war, more than 12,000 people were killed, fighters and civilians alike. Air power, intelligence networks, psychological warfare. The blueprint was written here. The rebels weakened, surrounded by surveillance and strategy. Victory didn't come from big battles. It came from control. The tactics created here were later exported to conflicts around the world. Counterinsurgency, surveillance, population control. And long after the fighting ended, its methods lived on. This wasn't just a war. It was the laboratory for modern counterinsurgency, a forgotten conflict, but one that changed how nations fight rebellions, and its shadow still shapes warfare today. This is war number 25 in this video. The first 15 wars are in part 1, linked in the profile and description. If you're learning something new, like, subscribe, and comment the next war you want a full deep dive on. War number 24, the Lebanese Civil War, a conflict where no side truly won. A nation of faiths and communities fractured into battle lines. Dozens of militias emerged, driven by politics, identity, fear, and survival. And soon, outside powers stepped in, each backing their own side. Across 15 years of violence, over 120,000 people were killed, and nearly 1 million displaced. Entire communities vanished, streets divided by invisible borders, neighborhoods turned into front lines. Block by block, house by house, allies became enemies, enemies became allies, again and again. And when the guns finally went quiet, nothing felt like victory. The war didn't just destroy buildings, it fractured identity. People rebuilt, but the trust never fully returned, and the wounds remained long after the ceasefire. This wasn't just a civil war, it was a battlefield where too many powers played their own game. A conflict without heroes, and no simple ending. But the people endured and kept moving forward. This is war number 24 in this video. The first 15 wars are in part 1, linked in the profile and description. And the story moves to the next chapter. War number 23, the Eritrean War of Independence. 30 years of struggle in near total silence. Eritrea's autonomy was dissolved, and resistance began to rise. The Eritrean People's Liberation Front fought from remote highlands and harsh terrain. For decades, it was a war of endurance, patience, and sacrifice. 3 decades of conflict, one of the longest independence wars of the 20th century. An estimated 200,000 people were killed, soldiers and civilians combined. Hundreds of thousands were displaced. Entire generations grew up in war. By the late 1980s, the resistance began to push forward. The balance shifted. The old regime weakened, and in 1991, Eritrea finally reclaimed its freedom. Independence came, but at a price written in loss. Those who survived carried decades of trauma, and the world barely noticed it happened. This wasn't just a forgotten war. It was a story history chose not to tell. A liberation won through time, resilience, and courage. And its legacy lives on in the people who endured it. This is war number 23 in this video. The first 15 wars are in part 1, linked in the profile and description. And the journey moves forward. War number 22, the Caucasian War. A battle fought on the roof of the mountains. For generations, highland communities lived between ridges, forests, and empire. When expansion pushed south, resistance rose from the peaks. They fought with terrain, mobility, and unbreakable resolve. 47 years of warfare, almost half a century. Entire communities were uprooted, homes left behind forever. Tens of thousands died, and hundreds of thousands were forced from their land. Strategy shifted from battles to removal and devastation. People walked from the mountains to distant shores. Many never returned. Victory wasn't declared on the battlefield. It appeared on a map. Families were scattered across seas and borders. Villages vanished, but memories stayed behind in the land, and the mountains remembered what the world forgot. This wasn't a campaign for territory. It became a struggle over identity and survival. A war rarely taught, but forever written in the mountains, and its echoes still travel through every valley it once touched. The story moves on to the next forgotten chapter. War number 21. The Ogaden War, where a border dispute became a global chess move. Somalia launched an offensive, determined to take back land it claimed as its own. Ethiopia fought to hold the region, while its government struggled through internal upheaval. And then the superpowers stepped in. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers were drawn into the fighting. Cuban troops and Soviet support turned the tide, almost overnight. By the end, tens of thousands were killed, and many more forced from their homes. The early advance collapsed. Momentum shifted the other way. Battles raged through towns and open desert fields, and when the ceasefire came, little had truly changed. Lives were lost on the ground, while decisions were made far away from it, and civilians were left to carry the outcome. This wasn't just a regional clash. It was a reminder that small wars can hide much bigger hands. A war few talk about, but one that exposed the politics behind the battlefield, and its impact still echoes across the region today. The journey continues to the next untold chapter. War number 20, the Ethiopian Adal War, where faith, kingdoms, and destiny collided. Across the high plateaus stood an old Christian empire, proud, powerful, deeply rooted. To the east rose the Muslim Sultanate of Adal, determined to challenge that world. This wasn't just a struggle for land. It was a conflict carried by belief. 14 years of marching armies, desert crossings, and brutal clashes. Tens of thousands died. Warriors, villagers, entire communities caught between fronts. Whole regions were emptied. Faith and survival pulling people in opposite directions. Foreign powers entered the war, supplying new weapons and new ambitions. The other side answered, turning a regional conflict into an international one, and the fate of two kingdoms came down to a handful of decisive encounters. Faith endured. Even as lands were shattered, empires rose and fell. But the people carried the memory forward, and the world barely remembered the war that reshaped their lives. This was never just a battlefield. It was a struggle over belief, loyalty, and the weight of history. A war rarely taught, but one that changed the heart of a continent, and its echoes still live in the land where it was fought. We move forward to the next forgotten chapter. War number 19, the Franco-Thai War. A border struggle hidden beneath the noise of World War II. While the world focused on Europe and the Pacific, tension simmered in Southeast Asia. Thailand moved to reclaim territories it believed had been taken in earlier eras. Clashes broke out across land and water, fast, sharp, and unexpected. A surprise sea battle left ships burning on open water. Across the conflict, over 1,000 people were killed or wounded. Borders shifted, and ordinary lives were caught in between. Negotiations came, guided by outside political pressure. A settlement was forced, territory transferred to Thailand, On paper, the war was brief, but its effects were lasting. Communities repaired what fighting had torn apart. For many, the war was small in headlines, but enormous in memory, and its story faded beneath the roar of greater wars. This wasn't just a minor border clash, it was a reminder that even small wars redraw the world, a conflict overshadowed by history's spotlight. But its lines are still visible on the map today. We move ahead to the next untold chapter. War number 18, the Burmese-Siamese Wars. Centuries of rivalry written in fire and stone. Two powerful states emerged, each determined to shape the region's future. For generations, battles swept across cities, jungles, and river valleys. Cities rose, fell, and were rebuilt again. More than 3 centuries of recurring wars and invasions. Thousands were displaced, families scattered across kingdoms. Countless lives were lost. Warriors, civilians, entire communities reshaped by conflict. Alliances shifted. Power changed hands more than once. Each defeat was followed by resurgence, neither side willing to fade, and the struggle shaped language, borders, identity, and memory. For ordinary people, war wasn't distant. It lived at their doorstep. The scars remained, even when history stopped talking about them. And much of the world never learned this story. This wasn't just rivalry between kingdoms. It was a struggle that helped define an entire region. A series of wars the world forgot, but their influence is still written across Southeast Asia today. If this story surprised you, hit like and subscribe to keep these hidden histories alive. Drop a comment naming the war you want a full deep dive on. I might make it the next episode. War number 17, the War of the Roses. A royal civil war that shattered a kingdom from the inside. 2 rival houses, York and Lancaster, both claimed the right to rule. What began as politics turned into decades of bloodshed. Loyalty shifted overnight. Friends became enemies in a heartbeat. 32 years, dozens of battles, power changing hands again and again. Tens of thousands were killed, nobles, soldiers, and commoners alike. Entire bloodlines disappeared, erased by war and ambition. Kings rose and fell, sometimes within the same lifetime. And in one decisive clash, the old era ended. A new dynasty emerged, but unity came at a heavy cost. To the people, this wasn't royal drama. It was survival. Battles scarred the countryside long after peace returned, and the throne proved fragile, no matter who wore it. This wasn't just a fight for power. It was a reminder that dynasties can fall faster than they rise. A war taught in fragments but rarely felt in full, and its legacy still echoes through the kingdom it once tore apart. We continue to the next hidden chapter. War number 16, the Dhofar Rebellion. A desert war fought in the shadows. In Oman's far south, a quiet region rose up against distant rule. Local fighters turned mountains into strongholds, striking and vanishing into the terrain. But this war didn't stay local. Powerful allies stepped in from the outside. 14 years of hidden conflict. Rarely seen, rarely reported. Thousands were killed, and communities were uprooted from the valleys they'd lived in for generations. Outside, nations supplied training, air support, and strategy, all behind closed doors. The war shifted from firefights to control and re-engineering of the region. Slowly, resistance lost ground, worn down by pressure and isolation. And when silence returned, very few outside the region even knew the war had happened. Behind strategy and secrecy were ordinary people caught in the middle. Lives changed quietly, without headlines, without recognition, and memory of the war faded almost as quietly as it began. This wasn't just a rebellion in the desert. It was proof that some wars are fought far from the world's attention, a conflict almost erased from history, but its echoes still linger in the land where it unfolded. We continue forward into the next forgotten chapter. Some wars disappear from textbooks, not because they were small, but because they were inconvenient. Stories that challenged empires were buried. Voices that questioned power were silenced. And entire nations paid the price while history pretended nothing happened. What we remember is chosen, and what we forget is often intentional, because memory threatens power, and truth makes silence uncomfortable. So we keep going, deeper into the stories the world chose not to tell. The next war isn't just history. It's another piece of truth brought back into the light. The wars we forget don't disappear. Their consequences keep moving with us. Borders drawn in conflict still define nations today. Trauma passes through families long after the guns go silent. And global tensions we see now trace their roots to wars most people never learned about. History isn't just in books. It lives in policies, identities, and memory. When we erase the past, we misunderstand the present. But when these lost stories resurface, the picture becomes clearer. So we move to the final chapter, bringing the last forgotten wars back into view. The past isn't gone. It still lives here, with us. You've just watched another chapter of FactStoryHistory. These weren't just battles. They were stories the world tried to forget. And now, we're bringing them back into the light. If you want part 3, say it in the comments. Just write part 3. And tell me which war you want a full deep dive documentary on next. If this opened your eyes, hit like, subscribe to stay with us on this journey through forgotten history. This is FactStoryHistory, where the past finally speaks again. We'll see you in part 3.